Todo bien, todo bien. ¿Y tú cómo estás?
Está bien cansado un poco.
Me imagino, me imagino. Ahí se ve en la cara que estamos iguales, cansados. Pero ahí
Yeah,
vamos adelante.
yeah, yes. Very hot today.
Yes, very hard. ¿Cómo estuvo la clase de ayer? Después tengo que
Yo,
llamarte y eso
yo me
para
salí
que...
temprano, yo me salí temprano ayer, acuérdate. Y él solamente habló acerca de exegesis, el PowerPoint. No habló mucho de asignaciones ni nada.
Oh, ya está bien,
Sí, sí.
está bien.
Yeah. Salud, hermana.
Hi,
Bendiciones.
how are you?
I'm fine. Nice to see you.
Dude, say hello to your wife.
Okay, I will.
Good evening, Miss Jefferson.
Hello,
How are you today?
doing well, and you all?
Quite well, thank you.
Having a bunch of bad weather. Thanks to Marco.
Are you? Where are you? Where are you
I'm
living?
in Columbia, Mississippi,
Oh, yeah,
down
yeah,
near the Gulf Coast.
yeah. So you're catching that hurricane.
Yep,
Wow,
we're
wow.
beginning to get bands of Laura coming in.
Uh, yeah, that other or whatever it was, a tropical storm, whatever that blew through here.
Mm.
Uh, that night we were supposed to have that first class. There's still people who don't have power.
Wow.
They're still trying to get power. Yeah, it's been it's been horrendous for a lot of
Yeah.
people. Yeah. It was, and it went through so fast. I mean, it was only probably blown through here for maybe about an hour, hour and a half.
Huh.
Man, it left about 1 million people without power.
Wow.
That's because I think we're so densely populated too.
Right.
Yeah. So,
That was Isaias, wasn't it? Isaias or whatever. I think
yes.
that was the one, wasn't it? Mm.
So I hope that you will be safe.
Thank you. Well, we managed through Katrina, the busy time. I was working for DHS and we were all over the place. But the Gulf Coast, that was horrible. You get carried on a conversation with people in a car going down there to try to help the people. And the minute you start coming into the county, your mouth, you just stop talking because you couldn't believe the devastation that you saw.
Mhm.
So, but anyway, God blessed.
Well, most people don't know. when you go through stuff like that, it's trauma. It's traumatic. It really is traumatic. It's difficult to live through, you know, when you go through that kind of trauma.
Have you had a chance to look at the work that we've turned in, Doctor? No.
Not yet, but I will.
Okay.
Tell you why.
I'm just curious about the format. I know we have to use a special format. I think I'm doing it right. I don't know.
First of all, that's why I tell the students, you know, I understand format, but I'm not concerned. I mean, don't pull your hair out about format.
Okay.
I can tell you who I'm not, and I can tell you who I am. I know, for example, all of your professors, they worked for me. And I know which ones
Okay.
will fail you over format.
Okay.
I'm just not that one.
Okay. Awesome.
I just want to be, what I want to know is, are you engaging? You know, that's more important to me. You know, I remember when I was in school, even as a small child, I didn't learn exactly the same way that other students learned, you know. So I'd often be chastised by the teachers who said that I wasn't doing it or I wasn't doing it right. But anytime they asked me what I was supposed to learn, I always knew it. And I could always go further and deeper than what they had even asked me about.
Yeah.
So the question in my mind was, are you concerned only about that? Or are you concerned about the activity of learning?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too is that when you start to deal with adult learners process things very, very differently. And so you should not expect out of an adult learner the same thing that you expect out of an undergrad in terms of being rigid, the rigidity. That rigidity will need to be there if you go on to pursue a doctorate, because when you do the doctorate, then there's some very, very rigid formatting that has to take place there.
Yeah.
But this is about, you know, exploration, trying to come to understand ideas and concepts that perhaps you will be able to apply later on.
Okay.
And so I don't believe in getting hung up in the minutia, because some things are minutia, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So. But we're going to give the others just a few more minutes, and then we're going to start, because I got several things I want to cover tonight. And I actually had uploaded a couple of more presentations on the website for today. So you should be able to see those at the, you know, when we get off tonight, or you can follow along, because I made sure I uploaded them so that you would have them immediately. So the ones that we'll be looking at today are they're on the website under the PowerPoints.
It's the one that says Measuring Church. It's Measuring Church, that's one, right, Doctor?
Yep.
Measuring, okay. Let me download it.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and we'll just trust that whoever else is going to come is going to come. Our Father in heaven, on this day, we want to thank you so very much for the opportunity that we have to serve you, and the opportunity that we have to be called by you and to be called by your name. We know, dear Lord, that the times in which we live in, the devil is not pleased with who we are and what we are and what we are attempting to do. But Lord, right now, we just ask that your spirit would please be with us, lead us and guide us. We need, above all else, wisdom. When Solomon could have asked for anything in the world, he asked for one thing and one thing only. He asked for wisdom. And so, Lord, tonight, we pray that you would grant to us that gift that brings all others in this train. Now, Father, into thy hands we commit ourselves this evening, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Now, I want to share with you a portion of scripture that I know that you know, but I always refer to this because it was very, very helpful to me, and it has always been helpful to me. When it comes to the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 10, 2 Chronicles chapter 10 and verse 6. 2 Chronicles chapter 10 and verse 6. And the Bible says, 2 Chronicles 10 verse 6, and King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men that had stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, saying, what counsel give ye me to return answer to this people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou be kind to this people and please them and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. But Rehoboam forsook the counsel which the old men gave him, and took the counsel with the young men that were brought up with him that stood before him. And he said unto them, what advice give ye me that we should return answering to this people which have spoken unto me, saying, ease somewhat the yoke that thy father put upon us? And the young men that were brought up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou answer the people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke easy, but make thou it somewhat lighter for us. Thus thou shalt say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. For whereas my father put a heavy yoke upon you, I will put more to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. Right. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, and the king bade, saying, come unto me again on the third day. And the king answered them roughly, and Rehoboam forsook the counsel of the old men. You know, there is something that is to be said for age, hopefully. Hopefully with age comes experience, and hopefully with age comes some level of wisdom. I've always had friends who were much older than I am even now. And I'm currently in my 60s, but I have friends who are in their 80s, and I talk to them regularly on a daily basis, because there are things that I'm still gleaning from them, things that I'm still learning from them. And it doesn't mean that persons who are old know everything. Sometimes as we grow older, we grow stale too. We don't keep up with what is going on around us as much, and we're not as up to date on certain things as perhaps we should be. And so, yeah, we always need younger folks around us, but we should never ever forget to forsake the wisdom of godly, mature individuals in our lives. One of the mistakes I've seen so many pastors make and so many church administrators make is that they think that immediately when they come into office, they have to erase everything that went before them. So Pastor A did this, and so that was what he did. This is what I'm going to do. And they just wipe it all out like it never existed. Like the person who preceded them was the worst thing that ever happened on the face of the earth. They will never allow that person's name to be spoken again. That person who preceded them will never be invited back to share the pulpit. It's almost as though those who preceded me were absolute idiots, and here I have come as Donald Trump to save the world, right? But if we learn how to build upon that which has gone before us, and learn how to listen attentively, then we can learn so much. You know, I took a class with Henry Wright 40-something years ago when I was a student at Oakwood. More than 40 years now. Must have been almost 50 years. That's a long time ago. I took a course with Henry Wright. And Henry Wright said that when he went to his first church, he started to talk, and one of the elders came and grabbed him and set him down and said, young man, I want to tell you something. I have been an elder longer than you've been old. I've been an elder longer than you've been old. And if you trust me, I'll steer you right. Sometimes we just need to sit down and listen to those who have been over the way. Some of them will be helpful. Some will be cantankerous. But I found even the cantankerous ones would be helpful if you listen. If you listen closely and listen carefully. You know, there's an African proverb that says, a new broom sweeps well. but the old broom knows the cracks. You heard that saying before, right? So in your congregations, I want you to take the time as you're trying to assess your congregations. Don't just talk to the ones who you know. Talk to some of the ones who've been around there for a while as well. Talk to some of the ones who maybe even no longer come to church anymore because they're too old to come to church. Talk to some of them as well and see what kind of insights you can glean from them that'll help you along the way. Let's just have another word of prayer. And I see Uber. I see you're out there somewhere in Cyberland.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm driving from Stanford to New York.
Okay, well, just go ahead and pray for us then, sir. You don't mind?
Sure.
Don't close your eyes. Don't close your eyes.
Oh, dear God, we just thank you for another wonderful day. Even as we gather today to learn, Father, I pray that you bless your manservant with wisdom, that he can impart wisdom to us, that we may learn and collectively be better people. We just thank you for all you're doing for us individually and all you're doing for us collectively. We give you all the glory and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so very much for that. I'm going to pull up for you something here. Where are you? It's here. Oh, stop sharing. Okay, let me do it one more time here. Oh, where are you? Disappeared on me. Oh, what happened? You guys still there somewhere? Okay. I'm gonna pull up something real quick. I just had it open. All right, there we are. Now, can you see this? Says Kansas Avenue 78 Adventist Church demographic survey results. Okay.
Yes.
You know, one of the things that I asked you to do is to try to get an assessment of the church that you're in. And I don't expect your assessment to be as detailed as this, but I do want you to think about it and think about some of the things that you will be able to glean, you know, depending upon how you do your assessment. Hold on just a second. That's my damn teacher class. Mike's calling me. Here's some of the things you can think about if you are attempting to assess the class and access the information. Okay. This was something that was done for Kansas Avenue back in November 2015. And what we did was try to gather some information from around the community and also inside the church to sort of get an assessment as to how our church set and how it was situated. Sometimes if you really want to understand where you want to take a church, you have to really understand where the church is. So there was a little background that was done on this particular church, talking about, a little bit about where it is. Kansas Avenue is in Riverside, California. And the purpose of the document was to try to get some demographic data for the Kansas Avenue KASDA Church, Kansas Avenue SDA Church. The methods that we used to gather this data were actually some surveys that we did. We put out surveys to the church on a number of different dates so that we could try to get our members to respond, so we could get a sense about where the church was. Now, I'm not asking you to do this kind of survey, but if you can do it, if you want to do it, if it's a church that you're working in and you think that it might be helpful and you're working along with a pastor who think it might be helpful, then why not do it, right? Under the results, right? The data was from 155 surveys. If you know anything about statistics, when you get that number out of a population, that's more than 10%. That was more like 15% of the book membership. So at that point, by statistical standards, it was statistically accurate, right? We could count on the numbers, right? And it was evaluated in a statistical program, right? So of the 155 respondents, 78% reported being members of the church. Some respondents did not report membership status, but still reported the number of years that they had attended. And the respondents ranged in years from 1 to 60s, with the mean years being about 20 years of membership, right? And the median being 19 years. So here's what we found, right? We wanted to know what the racial makeup of our church was, because that was important to us. If you ever go to Riverside, California, Kansas Avenue is predominantly black church in the city of Riverside, and the city of Riverside is predominantly Hispanic. Right? And so it's like a little island there. The total black population in that area in Riverside is only 8%. And so this church sort of sits as an island. So here's what it looked like, right? In Kansas Avenue, out of the people who responded, we had 6 Hispanic Latino, right? In comparison to that, you would find a comparable number being 49 in Riverside and 77 on the east side. So you can see that our church was really, really kind of out of balance with the neighborhood around it. The breakdown of male to female, and the male to female ratio, 52% male, 35% male. And I guarantee you, if you do your study in your church between the males and the females, you're going to find out, as we always do, there's more females in the church than male, right? And it is usually about 60-40, if sometimes not even more than that in terms of female. But in the city of Riverside, where the church sat, the female were 51-49. There was a much greater balance in the city than there was in the church. And where the church was located on the east side, and our neighborhood in particular, the balance was 50-50. The distribution by age in this particular church, you see that it was kind of low on teens, low on people in their 20s, low on people in their 30s, but all of a sudden, by the time you get to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, right, that's where you have the bulk of the membership. But look over where it says east side. What do you notice? Do you notice something different about the numbers for Kansas Avenue versus the numbers for the east side?
East side has a younger population.
Yeah, there's a lot more teens on east side.
Much younger population. So does that tell you something about this church?
It's thriving and growing, whereas the other one could possibly be dying out.
Well, let me say the east side is not another church. The east side is the neighborhood which the church sits. So the east side is the east side neighborhood.
Okay.
So you see the numbers for the church, and then you see the numbers for the neighborhood. Right? And you can see right there the dramatic difference between the church and the neighborhood. That means when I looked at those numbers immediately, you know what it said to me? my church is out of touch with its neighborhood.
Yeah.
My church, if those numbers don't change, my church is a dying church. But it also said to me that there's great potential for evangelism because there's so many young people that we haven't touched yet. But it also said evangelism is going to be tough because I don't have a strong base of young people from which to attract those other young people. So you can see a whole lot of dynamics just in looking at the numbers. In terms of the marital status, right? You can see that the bulk of the congregation was married, right? But I was really, really shocked here to see something that you don't usually see in numbers like this. This is something that was really, really highly, highly unusual in a church. I want to see if you can pick it out.
Widowers.
Widowers. Why do you say that's unusual? Why did you pick?
Women usually outlive men, but in this case, you got more men alive than older women, older men than older women.
Yeah. That was kind of fascinating, right? Really kind of fascinating to me. So that let me know that right there in my congregation, if I'm going to be doing family life, I've got to take into consideration that I have a large portion, 21% of the people in my congregation have lost a spouse. That's a huge number. So often when we think about family life ministries, we only think about the husbands and the wives, and we don't think about those who have lost a husband or wife to death. And then you add on top of that the additional 12% who lost a spouse to divorce. Right? And so you see that we have a real challenge there, okay? Now, educational status. Educational status. This thing it knocked me over for dead when I saw this, right? Educational status. It said here that in my congregation, 12% had a doctorate degree. 36% had a graduate degree, right? And another 31% had an undergraduate degree. When I saw that, I came to the conclusion that that congregation was, at least at that time, perhaps one of the most educated Black congregations in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I would put those numbers up against about any other numbers that you would find anywhere else in any other Black church in Adventism, because that number is just high, tremendously high. It's way, way over the national average. You know the number of Black people in America that usually have bachelor degrees? It's about 2%. So I got 12% who have a doctorate degree, 36% who have a graduate degree. Those are high numbers. Then I saw here the income, right? What do you notice about the income too?
There's a lot of money in that church.
Yeah, a lot of money floating around there. A lot of money floating around there. A lot of money. Because it's sort of interesting in the United States. Over half of the population in the United States right now earn less than $50,000. Half the population earns less than $50,000 in the U.S. So here you have a congregation where over half of its population earns way more than $50,000. So it's quite startling, right? This was a question, true or false statement. Tithes money are used for the local operations of the church. I wanted to know in this question what they thought about how the money was being used. If they were clear in their minds about how tithe money was being used. All right? So tithe money is used for the local operation of the church. All right? 64% said false, which is the correct answer, but 16% said true. So that means that 16% of the people who responded thought that the money they were putting in the offering plate for tithe was staying at home, and it wasn't. All right? How often do you return tithes? Right? some bi-weekly, bi-weekly or monthly or others. All right. What generation Seventh-day Adventists are you? And I want to know, you first, second, third, fourth generation Adventists. And you can see that this is a historic church, right? You got a lot of second and third and fourth generation Adventists, even though the congregation is older. Then I want to kind of know where they lived in proximity to the church, right? And so the church itself was in Riverside, and looking down here at just where they lived, right, you can see they were living all over the place. So that let me know too that I had a drive-in church, that most of them didn't even live in the same neighborhood where the church is. They were driving in from someplace else. And so there's a little discussion down there about what some of these things mean in terms of the ages, the marital status, the educational status, the income, and all the rest of that. And so what I will do is I will post this for you also, so you can just take a look at this, because, you know, getting that kind of snapshot about your church will help you to be able to make administrative decisions. You can't administer something that you don't know when you're administering. You know, you got to kind of figure out the lay of the land. And so pulling together some demographic data internally, externally is helpful. Taking a look at some of the key metrics and key indicators of your church, which we'll start talking about tonight. What are some of those key metrics and key indicators of church vitality and church growth? We'll talk about that. Those begin to give you that kind of snapshot, so you can start thinking about how your church is functioning, how it's operating, and how you can make it operate better or differently, what you would do differently if you had the chance. Any comments, questions on any of that? Okay. Well, I'm going to share with you something else then. So I want to spend just a little time this evening going over this, and then also the life cycle of the church. And the reason why I want to talk a little bit about measuring the church, because churches do go through these cycles of growth and development, and then finally churches begin to decline and die. But there are some metrics and some indicators that you can use to sort of track what's going on inside of your church. One way, of course, is to take a look at the basic demographic data. If I'm looking at a church, okay, how old are they? Where do they live? What's their income and their educational status? That gives me some indication as to who I'm dealing with. But then some of these other metrics help me to understand what is actually going on when I begin to pull back the layers and see what is actually going on inside of the church. So we'll talk about some of these metrics, and then we'll talk about leadership in the light of how churches grow and decline. Now, there are some pretty traditional metrics of church health, traditional metrics. And these are the things that Adventists are very familiar with. You know, membership, the attendance, conversions or baptisms, the giving patterns. This one says small group involvement or involvement in ministry, serving, and visitors. These are some of the traditional metrics of church health. And in these metrics, we find numerical growth, right? I mean, I guarantee you, if you get hired and the president sends you to a district, the first thing the president's going to want to talk to you about is numerical growth. I remember when my president sent me to my first district. I went there, and it was a country church in upstate New York. Yeah, most of New York State is rural. Right? Isn't that right, Uber? Most of New York State is rural. I had this rural church in upstate New York with 33 members. Only 15 showed up. And I remember the president says, "We're sending you there to baptize souls." And when I got there, I remember driving out there trying to find a church, and I drove 2 or 3 times up and down the road, looking, I'm asking. Nobody could even tell me where the church was. I'm lost. And finally, I pick up the phone, and the elder said, "You drove past it." And then I drive up to a house, and I go inside the house, and the church was in his living room. And I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, "Really, Mr. President, you want me to grow this? First of all, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and now, you know, my church is a living room in the middle of nowhere, and you're asking me to grow it." Right? Because oftentimes, the conference will judge a church upon membership, upon attendance, and upon conversions or baptisms. Because these things are easy to take a look at. The number is the number is the number is the number. Right? But the question is, do you actually know what these numbers mean and how you can maximize or use these numbers? So what is membership? Right? Membership is the actual number of persons on the official record. So right now, in my church, I've got I think 1,200, and after last week we just had baptism, we got 1,284 members, I believe, on the books. That's my actual membership. Right? That's how many folks I have on the books. What is the membership of your church? Do you know the actual membership? Just everybody go around Robin. I want to know what the actual membership of your church is. The church that you're working with right now.
My church is 455 people.
455, okay.
68.
68.
Membership in our church is about 120.
Oh, okay.
But attendance is much less.
Okay, it is much less. Okay.
My show is 140
Okay.
across.
Close. Okay. And so,
25.
okay, because you have a mission just starting. Okay. All right. But so the reason why I ask you is that you really want to know what that number is. Right? Because if you don't know that number, then these other two items here don't make as much sense to you unless you actually know what that book membership is. So you do have the actual membership, then you have the attendance. The attendance is the actual number of people that are in worship every week, and that includes both members and visitors. And question for you, all right? Do you know how many visitors were in your church last week? Do you know?
We're doing Zoom, and Columbia and the Hattiesburg Church, apparently there was 325 people who listened to the Zoom.
Amen. So your church is doing quite well being closed, right? Yeah.
The week before last, that's when I was in church. We had, I think, 11 people at church, and 3 people were visitors.
All right. 11 and 3 were visitors. Okay. Well, the reason why this is important to know is that what you want to start doing, even start doing it this week, whether it's online visitors that you have, if the church is closed, or whether it's in person, start to keep a log. You want to see how that trend, how that line is trending. Is it trending up? Is it trending down? You want to see, for example, if your attendance is increasing around the holidays. Does it dip during the summertime? Does it come back in the fall? Do people leave town at certain times of the year? What impact the COVID is having upon your membership? I mean, all these things are tremendously important, because as you start to think about planning for your church, you have to take all of these things into consideration. So start on a weekly basis tracking your attendance. I have my clerks every week counted. They stand there and they count the actual number of people. And then I have my person on the door give me a report every week, so I know exactly who these visitors are that walk through the door. So I know the number of visitors and I know the number of people that were in the house. And then this third thing is your active membership. Your active membership is the number of persons who attend worship regularly. And by active, we mean about twice a month. For me, I would love to see people more than that, but twice a month, they're still active. They consistently return tithe and offering and are engaged in some form of church ministry. Those are the active ones, right? That means you. That describes you, right? So here's a question here, if that's the case. Which of these three is most important for a constituency meeting? Which of these three metrics are most important for a constituency meeting?
The actual membership.
The actual membership. Why?
I think they do the number of delegates based off of how many members your church has.
Yep. They do the number of delegates based upon how many actual members you have. So, if I want to have a lot of influence at the next constituency meeting, I want to be president. I want to be president of the conference, right? What would I have a tendency to do, even if these people are not active? What would I have a tendency to do? Would I remove them? Would I keep them?
You wouldn't change anything about the status if somebody left or needed to be removed. You let them stay.
Right. Because having a lot of people on your books gives you more political power. And it gives you more political power also with other clergy in your community. It gives you greater political power in your city with your officials. Like when I walk in to talk to my city council, I have the Speaker of the House of the state of New York on my cell phone. I could pick him up and call him right now. He can pick up the phone. My city council, I can pick up the phone right now. He can pick up the phone. You know why? Because I have nearly 1,300 members on my books in their district, and they want those votes. So if I pick them up and call the phone, they're going to do anything I ask them to do because my book membership is large. But my active membership is only about half of that book membership. You understand? So I can have 1,300 members. On a good Sabbath, I see about 650 people. Only about half, all right, are in attendance, all right? And if I really shave it down from there to see the active, the really, really active, it may be about 300 out of the 1,300 who are the most active, who are engaged in ministry on a regular basis, who are consistently returning tithe and offering. All right? So out of these three things, which do you think would be, which do you think is most important for your church growth?
I think active members.
Say active.
Active members.
All right.
Maybe attendance.
Attendance. All right. So we got a fight going on now. I like a good fight. All right. Yeah, a good fight. All right. Justify why you say active membership, and then justify why you say attendance.
But active members, because I mean, as the description says, is the number of persons who attend worship regularly. So those would, those are the ones that we think that might be, in touch with God, and are the ones that God would probably use to help the church grow, because they're constantly active in the church, doing whatever it is that they're doing, versus attendance.
Okay, so they're active and engaged.
I'll say active members because they're paying tithe and offering.
like that money.
It makes a difference when you're trying to do evangelism. If you don't have it to do it, you can't get new members in.
That's absolutely true. That's true. Well, I think that out of these three, that active membership is probably the one that you need most for church growth. Attendance is good, but attendance can be fleeting. What I mean by that is that have you ever gone to one of these churches where it's the it church, it's the happening church, right? So everybody goes there and everybody loves to hear the pastor preach, and the pastor has the praise team going, and everything is right and everything. And then the pastor leaves and a new pastor comes, and all of a sudden attendance drops. Well, that attendance dropped because those people were not really your active members. Your active members, the ones who are really embedded into the church, they stay, regardless of the vicissitudes, whether they like the pastor or don't like the pastor. You know, they see themselves as wedded to that congregation, and they stay over the long haul. So you can always train your active membership to become more engaged and more involved than what they actually are. That is really key for your church growth. All right, so here's something else that you ought to be aware of. If you're going to try to figure out the strength of a church, you ought to also know the conversion ratio, right? And the conversion ratio here, it describes it as at least 20 to 1. That means it takes 20 people within that church to win one person. That would be considered to be a healthy conversion ratio on an annual basis, 20 to 1.
Dr. Wood,
Yes.
excuse me, do you have anybody waiting? I'm in an app and I keep seeing people talking about they can't get in. Like John Jimerson and Leonardo and Henry. I'm sorry, Leonardo. Yeah, Leonardo and Henry and Chris.
No, I'm actually not seeing them show up as waiting.
Yeah, that's for
Okay.
that's for another class.
They're
man.
in a different class. They're not in this class.
Yeah, it's for another class.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You had me for a minute.
Me too.
Oh, because you know, I'm catching up. Me and technology, we're catching up with each other here. So, but that conversion ratio is a 20 to 1 on an annual basis, right? So that means that if, which really is about what, about 5% growth.
Mhm.
So a healthy church would have about a 5% growth in the course of the year. A really, really evangelistic, healthy church. So if your church is growing less than that, then that says, well, there's maybe a few things that we need to tweak. Now, that 20%, I mean, that 5% growth would be nothing in Africa, nothing in certain parts of the Caribbean, nothing. They would laugh at a 5% growth. In certain parts of the world, right now, we are seeing 15, 20, 50% growth in the course of the year. They sort of laugh at the West. But in the West, in North America, that would be a very, very high conversion rate. There used to be a time in the African-American work in the regional conferences where 5% was standard, 5-6% was standard. And I would go to meetings and the regional presidents would brag about their 5 and 6%. And they would sort of snicker at the white conferences that had like a 2% growth or 2.5% growth. But now, if you take a look at the numbers, the regional conferences are where the white conferences were about 15 years ago. Now they're there at 2.5% growth. And it has a whole lot to do with what's going on in our society. But you ought to know what that conversion ratio is. And in a healthy church plans its evangelism to meet a healthy conversion ratio. You're going to plan a healthy conversion ratio. So last year, right, I had 1,200 something members. I said, what do I need to do now? What do I need to do? I said, I need to be somewhere around 7-8%. So I set a goal at that. I didn't make the goal, but I got a whole lot closer to that goal than I would have had we not set the goal. See? So plan for that healthy conversion ratio. You ought to think about that and know what it is in your planning process. How else? What are some of the other metrics that can be used to judge the stability of a church? Here is the financial stability. Financial stability. You know that there's not a whole lot of money in churches, and oftentimes in the Adventist church, money is being pulled in so many different directions. We talked last week a little bit about how the tithe dollar is used, how some of it stays at the conference and goes to the union, then the division, the general conference, and how your little dollar gets cut up so much that there's not a lot left down at the bottom. We also know that in the Adventist church, at the local level, the local church is totally dependent upon offerings. Totally dependent upon offerings. So even after you send the 10% away, you've got to generate more over top of that just to be able to operate. So financial stability. There are some ratios, and we will come back to this later on in the class to talk about some of this when we talk a little bit more about budgeting. But right now, as we're talking about metrics, there is somebody waiting to get in. Just pop it up. Who's waiting? Gloria Williams. Welcome, Sister Gloria Williams. Great to have you. All right, and we will catch up immediately after class because I need to have a conversation with you. But it's great to have you with us this evening. Okay? We were talking just a little bit, Sister Williams, about metrics that we use to judge the vitality and the health of the church. So right now, I'm just going to go back just for a second. I'm just going to run back through this quickly since she wasn't with us. We're talking about measuring the church. We talked about some of these traditional metrics for measuring the health of the church. And they are the numerical growth. And we judge that numerical growth by membership, attendance, and baptisms. We also were just speaking just before you came on about a conversion ratio, which is how many members does it take to win one person, right? And you can look at it in the same way as how many salesperson does it take to sell one car, you know, right? To get one buyer to buy one car, right? So we said about a 5% growth is what you want to take a look at in your conversion ratio. Now, we just started talking about our financial stability. I was mentioning that there are several ratios that we want to take a look at, and we'll go over this later on in the class when we get more into budgeting. But if you want to know if a church is healthy, you got to look at the money. Look at the money. I mean, I've been to churches before. Churches are overflowing with people. There's people everywhere, and the church doesn't have a blessed dime. Right? People aren't giving. And the church is heavily in debt. I know of a situation where a small congregation of less than 2,000 people went out and purchased a building that gave them a nearly $50,000 a month mortgage. Why the conference let them do it, I have no idea in the world. There's a congregation right now that is in the process of trying to build a $4 million building, and their tithe base is only about $250,000. The numbers just don't add up. Right? So you want to say, what makes a church healthy? If I want to evaluate church, I also got to take a look at its finances a little bit too. So there are some ratios that are used to look at the vitality. And these are things that you can pretty much do on your own if you have the information. So if you have a chance to maybe sit down with your treasurer, then here are some of the things that you may just want to map out quickly just for your own sake. There's something called quick ratio. The quick ratio looks at cash and cash equivalents. So, you know, a cash equivalent might be any other thing you can use the same as cash, whatever that might be, plus short-term investments and accounts receivables. Now, most people say an account receivable. How is that cash? Well, if somebody owes you money, it's an IOU. It's like money in the bank. They just haven't paid you yet. Like my son, he has high account receivable with me. I helped him fix his car. On my books, I've got $1,800 that I'm still waiting to have come in. You understand how that is, right? So that's an account receivable. It's something that somebody owes you. You just don't have it in your hand just yet. So you take all of the money that's owed you, all your short-term investments, and all the cash, all the things that you could quickly convert into cash in the next 30 to 60 days or so. And then you divide that by your liabilities. And that gives you a quick ratio. That lets you know how much money do you have on hand, right? There's also another version of this called the cash ratio, which is a little bit less cumbersome. But it's your cash and your cash equivalents and your investment funds over your liabilities. And so you take a look at those things, and then you can say, oh yeah, now I know exactly how much cash I have, because you don't know what you have until you divide it by your liabilities. Now, in most cases, a healthy organization is going to have 6 months worth of cash on hand. So that if you could shut down all your operations, you should be able to operate for 6 months. That's how your personal budget ought to operate as well. Now, most of us are not there, right? If I shut down tomorrow, can I float for 6 months? I don't know if I can or not. But I should be able to if I'm going to be a healthy financial being. I should be able to have that money to float. In the same way, the church has to be able to float. And we got to get past the days when we expect the church to operate on the slimmest of margins while we operate off fat margins. So we will spend every last dime the church had, but we wouldn't do that to ourselves. Right? So you got to know these various working capital ratios. And working capital, how much actual cash do I have on hand, and how many days will that cash allow me to continue on? And then your debt ratio. Right? Remember when I was talking to you about the church that wanted to have a $4 million facility and only taking $250,000 in tithe? Well, if they're only taking $250,000 in tithe, right? Let's say only taking $250,000 in tithe. And let's say everybody is faithful and they give 5% of that. That means that the actual cash for the year is only $125,000. They don't have enough money to finance the mortgage, to pay the utilities, to do ministry of any kind, even to pay the insurance and other kinds of things that you have to pay in order to operate a building. So their debt ratio is going to be too high. So when you want to look at a church's health and vitality, if they have high debt, that church is in trouble. They're in deep trouble. Okay. Then also the cash flow to debt, right? Now, cash flow to debt is something that it's a little bit more nuanced, but I can explain to you like this, right? Sometimes, let's say you get paid at the beginning of the month, right? And your mortgage is due on the 15th, but you get paid again on the 15th, even though your mortgage is due on the 1st. You don't pay it until the 16th because you got paid again on the 15th, and you need all your check from the 1st and the 15th to pay the mortgage on the 16th. That is an issue of cash flow. It's not that I don't have the money. The question is it coming in at the time when I need it in order to be able to meet my obligations? That's cash flow, right? Sometimes the churches will have the money coming in, but it's not coming in at the right time. And if it doesn't come in at the right time, then you could quickly dig a hole for yourself, and the church can find itself in deeper and deeper holes. Because every time you're late, every time you miss a payment, now you have to do the interest and the penalties on top of that. So if a church does not have a good cash flow to cover its debt, then they're also in trouble. So, any questions on any of that? Did you get all that? We'll go over it again later. But the working capital, right? Your cash equivalents, and your investments over your current liabilities, right? And your debts, right? These are some typical metrics that are used, okay? Now, if I'm going to try to judge the vitality and the health of the church, I want to see an increase in the overall giving. So I want to measure what is that overall giving, and I'd like to see an increase in that overall giving over time. So, in the same way that if I owned a small business and I'm initially saying that my profits my first year are going to be at 50,000, I want to see those profits increase over time to know that my business is growing and it is healthy. So, if a church is not seeing an increase in its overall giving, then that church is flat. If it starts to see a decrease, then you also know that your church is in trouble. But that is why in your administration, you got to track these trends. You got to start keeping the data, because data is going to help you to make wise decisions in administration. In administration, you should never be in a position where you're not making data-driven decisions. And if you are in charge of an operation and you have a treasurer or an accountant that cannot do these things for you, you have one of two options. No, one of three options. Number one, get that person the training. If the person is willing to learn but doesn't know, get the person the training. Right? Let them learn. Right? If the person is unlearned and unwilling, get rid of them because you need to know this information. And then the third option, which is the option that you really, really don't want to do. Only do this if you have to. If they can't do it for you, then do it yourself. Do it yourself. But one of the things you want to learn in administration is that if you're the administrator, you ought to know the numbers, but you shouldn't be the one who's crunching the numbers. You ought to know how to crunch the numbers if you have to crunch the numbers. You ought to know what the numbers mean when you're looking at the numbers. But you shouldn't be the one who is doing the actual crunching of the numbers, because you need to have a separation of roles. Your role is to provide that oversight, not necessarily to provide the day-to-day number crunching and to track those trends. But for your own sake, when you get those reports, you ought to be able to say, all right, I can see the trend. The trend is going up, the trend is going down, and I kind of know where we are as an organization. So we want to increase the overall giving. But also, if I'm in an organization like a church, it's important to me not just to increase the overall giving, but I also want to increase the number of givers. Does anybody out there know what is the average percentage of people who return tithe and offering regularly in the church? Anybody know what that percentage is?
60%?
60?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
That's a guess. That is a guess. Nope.
30%.
Yeah, it's more like 30%. Yeah, it really is. It's more like about 30%. That's pretty consistent across the board. And only about 30% of the membership is returning regular tithe and offering. Only about 30%. And you know this. How do you know this? Because remember, we talked about book membership versus active membership. If you take a look at your book membership, and then you take a look at your really, really active membership, it starts to whittle down. When it starts to whittle down, that's when you know, right? Those are your real givers. If you are in charge of a church or in charge of a church operation, it would do you well to know how many people you have who are giving and who those givers are. Now, one thing that I always do, I never try to meddle to find out how much people give. Because the one thing you don't want to have in your operation at all is for people to feel like the pastor or the administrator is messing with the money or knows exactly what they're giving and trying to find out who's naughty or nice. People, when they give, they want to give and feel like, hey, I've given and what I have is private. I don't want to mess with your privacy, right? But I do want to know who's giving. Because the givers, I want to thank them for giving. And then the ones who are not giving, I want to encourage them to give so that I can increase those numbers of givers. And then finally, it's important to increase the amount per giver. So the number of givers, right? How much they give, but then I want to increase that amount consistently over time. That means that if my folks are used to giving 2% of the overall tithe, right? I would say, listen, next year, why don't you try to go up to 3% or 4%? Let's see if God blesses you. So you want to do that in order to increase these metrics. Then finally, before we go on to our next presentation, engagement. This other metric is the metric of engagement. And that is the numbers of members, right? So that information you already have, right? You'll know who your active membership, the numbers, sheer numbers, your numbers of active members, but then the increase and the decrease over time. Because what I want is that number of active members to increase over time. If my number of active members increase over time, my tithe is going up, my conversions are going up, my financial ratios are going to be looking healthier. So I want that number to increase over time. If I start to see it decrease, then I know that my organization is in trouble and that I need to be looking at making some changes. So, any questions? I know I talk a lot, but that's just me.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
People move a lot, or people could move a lot. Should you return tithe where your membership is, or should you change your membership to follow you, or should you just return tithe wherever you're attending?
Well, one of the things that we have in the Adventist Church is something that's called E-Adventist. E-Adventist is a system that's set up and it operates through the North American division. And now they're actually doing it pretty much around the world wherever they can do it, where technology allows it, definitely in the NAD. E-membership holds the membership so that at any time, if you go to a new location, you can ask for the membership. And now it doesn't go just from clerk to clerk, it goes up into the system. The system verifies the membership, and then it goes back down to your new location. One of the things that we always try to encourage people to do is that if you move to a new location, to change your membership, right? Change your membership. Because wherever you are, you want to be one of those active members in that local congregation. And that local congregation needs your body as well as your resources. Now, one of the challenges that we've seen, and this is an interesting challenge, I understand why it happens, but it's indicative of the nature of a immigrant situation. I'm in New York, right? I think Uber is in New York. Anybody who's been in South Florida, for example, Florida or New York or the Northeast sector, will know.
I'm in Florida, Pastor.
Okay, so you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, we have in these areas that are entryways into the United States, we tend to have large port cities where people enter into the country. And so we have our growth taking place primarily amongst immigrant populations, right? And so because we have this growth primarily amongst immigrant populations, these members tend to give something to the local church, but they also remember the church from which they've come. And they feel like they've been so blessed to be in the United States that they often send money back home. And they may send their tithe or their offering back home to help their local church or to help some particular mission project back home. And while that's commendable and laudable, what impact does it have? What impact do you think that it has upon, number one, the local church, and number two, the local conference?
Very much.
Hmm. You saying something, Sister Williams?
I said not very much because I guess if they sending 50% back home and 50% where they are, that's a decrease in the local church.
Decrease in local church. Yeah. Now I want you to be a conference administrator, right? Right. Pretend. Right now, I'm going to be the president of the general conference. Okay. Now, as of right now, I W all conference presidents. You are all conference presidents right now. All right. Say thank you, Dr. Blue. I never thought I'd be a conference president, but I am now. Right. Thank you. So give me some love back, right? Thank you. Yeah, all conference presidents. So now you're all conference presidents. Right? Now your conference has 170 churches. Say yeah, you're doing very well. 170 churches, right? Out of your 170 churches, you have 150 ministers who are serving that 170 churches. Some have 2 churches or 3 churches, right? They say, yeah, I got 150 ministers, right? Out of those 170 churches, right, you have 80 churches that are able to take care of themselves. In other words, they generate enough tithe and offering to justify putting a minister there, okay? Yay. So about half your churches are able to justify taking it. And out of that half that are able to take care of themselves, you only have about another 20% or so that are able to turn in enough tithe and offering to take care of another 20 churches or more, because they turn in more than what they would consume in terms of services. Yeah, you got churches that get. What's your problem? Or do you have a problem? Do you have a problem?
And then these are the other churches that can't afford their expenses
Yeah.
or to be a church.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm a let's say, because if you are the conference president, where are you going to get the resources from to pay for those other 35, 40 churches now that are left out there who are not generating enough money? And it's not that they're not generating enough money, because the money is coming in, but some of that money is leaving your conference and going someplace else. Now you've got a problem, because now, what are you going to have to do with your workforce?
Reduce it.
Why? Why are you going to have to reduce your workforce? We didn't hear you.
I said someone was going to have to take on extra work because you can't afford to have people you can't pay for.
You can't pay for it. Right. You just can't pay for it. And so one of the dilemmas that conference administrators find themselves in all the time is the fact that they may have people who are in a particular location, but if their tithe and their offering is not supporting that particular location and is leaving the conference going someplace else, then it makes it difficult for the conference administrators to sort of balance the budget and also to expand the work into new territories, because they need those tithe dollars in order to be able to expand the work into new territories and to start new churches. So that's a long answer to a short question, Joy. But did it make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. For many years, I bounced around, and when I was a little younger, I didn't want to change my membership because I wanted to be in my home church. But then, the impact of that is cumulative, Because some people say, well, it's only me. I'm the only one that's doing this. Well, no, it's you and somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. After a while, it has a snowball effect. Okay. So are y'all clear about what metrics you can use now? Of course you are. So.
Yes, we are, Doctor.
All right. So now, I want to talk to you. Oh, it's 7:15 already. Okay. I want to talk to you about the life cycle of a church. And perhaps you will see how some of this applies. Stop share. Hey, I want to share with you just for a few about leadership and life cycle of the church. And originally, I looked at this in the light of one of the churches that I actually was pastoring at the time because of its history. And its history sort of indicated something to me was happening that needed some addressing. So I'll talk a little about the life cycle of a church. Remember, now we're talking about metrics that we use in order to measure the health of a church. And so we want to take a look about what cycles church go through, because this is another way that you can use to indicate where your church is, using metrics to help you to do this, okay? So, pregnant before, seen somebody who's pregnant, or been a mother or father or auntie or somebody, right? You know that the baby all starts with a dream, a little glint in the eye, and before you know it, Lord have mercy, it's on its way, right? And as the child comes into the world, right, a new toddler is really excited about the world. The toddler comes, and my granddaughter right now is 2, she'll be 3 in October. And she just sees all the excitement in the world. There's nothing that's impossible to her. You know, she climbs up on the top at the top of the stairs and thinks that she can jump, 14 stairs down all the way to the bottom without hurting herself. She just doesn't think that there's no limits to what she's able to do. All she sees is opportunities, and everything is a world of exploration. That's how it is when you're a toddler, right? When we get into our teen years, though, right? The teen years are times of testing, right? Testing limits and establishing identity. So we start asking different kinds of questions in our teen years. We're doing the toddler years, everything is possible. Teen years, we start saying, what makes me different? How can I express my difference? What do I bring to the table? How am I growing? We start to evaluate our growth slightly differently than we do when we're baby. Baby, we're just growing. We don't even know how we're growing. We're just growing, right? Young adulthood is the acquiring years, right? That's when we settle and get to young adult, right? We settle into deep friendships and significant relationships, or we may marry. We make our own rules now. We establish our own house. Then as we get a little older, right, we now settle into our routines. So, my wife and I right now, we're not doing the same things we used to do when we were like 25 or 30. We're at a different place in our lives, right? I told my wife the other day, I said, you know what? I really don't have to buy any more furniture again in life. I have enough furniture. And I just want to change something out because I need something new. Well, I've got a wash machine, I've got a dryer, I've got another wash machine and dryer in the garage that I'm not even using. I got a stove in the garage I don't even use. I got what I need 4 sofas for. I don't need anything. I've got everything that I need. I appreciate all the gains that I've had in life, but I'm comfortable. I'm not going to go out and work 2 more jobs to buy another sofa, right? So as we mature, we look back on the things we've obtained, the wisdom that we gained from our past, right? And we look and remember the time of our youth. We start to look back and say, yeah, honey, you remember the time when we used to, remember the good old days? We look backwards. But sooner or later, if you live long enough, you're going to face the reality of declining health and vigor. And finally, the end result is death. So there's a human life cycle. And Sister Francina, if you worked in human services, you're well aware of the human life cycle. Anybody who's looked at human development knows the life cycle, right? This birth, this infancy, childhood, adolescence. Oh man, what a great time adolescence was, right? No, this time. I wish I could be a teenager again. No, you just forgot what it was like to be a teenager, right? Adolescence, then you get to the prime, your adulthood, your maximum earning years, your maximum earning potential. You got vitality, you're still on the upswing. Then you have that maturity, you sort of settle in. Then you go to the empty nest, where things start to slow down, retirement, old age, and then death. That's the life cycle of the human being, right? These are phases that we just go through. Right? Well, just like there's a life cycle in human growth and development, right? Organizations have a life cycle as well. There are stages of organizational development. There's birth, there's infancy, there's childhood, there's adolescence, there's that prime adulthood, empty nest, retirement, old age, and death. So organizations go through changes too. But what these life cycles teach us in life and in organizations is really important. Number one, change is inevitable. Nothing stays the same. And where a lot of organizations make huge mistakes in the administration, huge mistakes, when they want to keep everything the same and still apply the same policies and the same protocols and the same practices that they did at a different stage of the organization. And nothing changes. Change is inevitable. It's going to happen. So the question is, are you prepared for the change, and can you address the change when it comes, right? And not only that, but change is neutral. Why do I say change is neutral? I say change is neutral because change doesn't care. Change, people say, change is for the better or it's for the worse. No, change just is. It's neutral. It doesn't care one way or the other, right? Change doesn't have an agenda. It just happens. And so that's why it's neutral. It's neutral because the way that you choose to address the change is positive or negative in terms of the outcome. Right? Change is also a response. What do I mean by change as a response? Can anybody even take a guess at that? Take a stab in the dark? Change is a response. What do I mean by change as a response?
Something else will change either in your organization or outside, or just years going by, and so everything is a change. So any change that happens in your organization is responding to other changes that you can't control.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you see that change is a response to something else that has already occurred, then you don't have to get mad at the change, right? Instead, what you want to do is study the catalyst that prompted the change. So some people are so resistant to change. No, never here, never. Don't get upset. Step back, look at it, examine it, find out what was behind the change in the first place. But also, because change is a response, change also demands a response. You know, in physics, there is no neutrality. For every action is an equal and opposite reaction, right? Right? What happens in one arena affects something else in another arena, right? There's no such thing. If I move my hand this way, it affects something else. You've heard of the butterfly effect, where if a butterfly is flapping its wings in China, it can cause a hurricane on the other side of the earth. But why does it happen? The smallest of tiny changes changes the dynamics of everything else and can change large things all around it. So change is going to happen, but as it happens, it also demands a response. The response can be either I accept the change, or I rearrange and modify to meet the change, or I resist the change. But it does demand a response, and it will have a response, whether that response is active or passive on your part. Therefore, in the development and management of your organization, right, you must acknowledge change, track the change, respond to the change, and then finally, you have to change yourself. Because there's changes around you, you have to change. And watching trends can help you to monitor this change. And I don't think we'll get through all this tonight, but that's okay. When we get to the end, we'll pick up from there, right? So here's how you can tell when things are changing. Sometimes changes happen rapidly, like COVID-19. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden the world has changed. Have mercy. You know where I am right now? Right? I'm in my house. I'm under quarantine by the state of New York because I went out and I did my uncle's funeral in California. I came back to New York. They are tracking me by my cell phone. If I leave my house, they know it. I could get a $10,000 fine, right? Leaving my house. So I'm on mandatory lockdown for the next, I got, 10 more days to go before they let me out of jail, right? Right? So, some changes are quick and dramatic overnight, but some changes emerge over time. And the ones that are emerging over time are the ones that you can watch and you can track. Because if you're able to track those trends, then you can prepare yourself for the change rather than it being sprung upon you. Now, prophets are able to predict the future. But unless you're a prophet or a psychic, right, or something like that, we won't let you. But trend trackers are able to estimate and approximate the future. So I can't predict, but if I watch the trends, I can see which way the wind is blowing, and I can tell you what's going to happen 5 years from now. For example, if I'm looking at my key metrics in my church, and I'm looking at my attendance, my active membership, I'm looking at my finances, I'm looking at engagement, and I'm watching those trends and tracking those trends on a regular basis, and I'm seeing those numbers go up, the numbers go down. I'm looking at my neighborhood around me, seeing that my church is either in sync or out of sync with the neighborhood that's around me. Then I can sit there and say, if none of these things change and these trends are consistent, then 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we will be exactly where I predict that we'll be. I first came to Oakwood in 2001, and I came as the chaplain, and then I served as the vice president, right, from 2002 to about 2007, I think it was, something like that, I don't know. But there was something I noticed when I first came in 2001. I had been tracking trends. Tracking the trends of black females who were entering into college, black males who were entering into college, right? And at that time, the numbers were about 50-something to 40-something. So, it was like 46% males and 54% females, something like that. I'm tracking the trends. I said, listen, I told the people, because I had enrollment in my portfolio. I said 5 years from now, those numbers are going to be 60-40. He said, how do you know? I said, I'm just looking at the trends. I said in 2001, exactly where Oakwood is today. I said that to one of my persons who was responsible for me, who had many years of experience in higher education. Here's where Oakwood's going to be in the year 2020. He said, how do you know? I said, I'm just looking at the trends. 2020, Oakwood's going to be right here. You're going to have these many students. These are going to be the financial challenges. These are going to be the type of the issues that the university is going to face. I'm not a prophet, but you're able to estimate based upon trend tracking. Prophets predict the future based upon divine revelation, but trend trackers estimate on the basis of what kind of information? Relevant information. That's why your data is so key. If your data is right, then your forecasting can be right. There are people who make tons of money on Wall Street, and all they do is just forecast, track trends, right? So, here's a trend. 1957, this car was hot, right? That's a hot car. Matter of fact, I still think that's a hot car, right? That's a T-Bird. That's a Thunderbird. That's a Ford Thunderbird. 1957 Ford Thunderbird, right? But the current dilemma of the auto industry actually began in the 1970s, when the baby boomers began to switch to smaller, more fuel-efficient cars during the gas shortage. So the Thunderbird was a muscle car, burned a lot of gas. By the time you get to the 70s, though, people are starting to want smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. So the Japanese, who were tracking the trends, gave us what we wanted, a small car. Right? I actually had one of these. I had a 1978 Toyota Corolla. I called it Lucy.
I had a 79, doctor.
Yeah, 79.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Back then, Toyotas were not the best cars in the world. I'll tell you that. They were not the best cars in the world. My car, I used to call my car Lucy because I named it after a song. The song was, "You took a fine time to leave me, Lucille." So I called her Lucy because every time I wanted the car to start, we never start. Matter of fact, the car was so bad that in the morning I had to get an extension cord with a hairdryer, stick the hairdryer out the window and open the hood and dry all the wires off with the hairdryer before the car would start. You know, the transmission was kind of bad, stupid. So I used to have to park on the hill so I could get a good rolling start down the hill, so I could pop the clutch and get the car to start. It was a bad car. Matter of fact, when my wife was pregnant, it was time to take her to the hospital to have our first child. Lucille quit on me, right? Terrible car. But the Japanese knew something that the Americans didn't know. What the Japanese understood was, here I was a poor student. I could not afford a muscle car. I couldn't afford a Cadillac or Oldsmobile. I could afford a 1978 used Toyota Corolla that I inherited when I married my wife. That's why I could afford it, right? So that's what they did. But then they got smart, right? Over time, they said, well, people want small cars, but they want small cars that are efficient and reliable. So consequently, right now, Toyota ranks in the top 10 companies in the world in terms of customer satisfaction and reliability, right? Because they tracked the trends, they gave us what we wanted. Can you adjust on the backside of a trend? So let's say you're not tracking the trends and you are the administrator. Can you adjust on the backside of the trend? Yeah, you can. But just imagine how much easier it would have been if General Motors had listened to the customers. General Motors went practically bankrupt. It did go bankrupt really 10 years ago. It got bailed out by the government. But they went bankrupt because they were making cars that nobody wanted. When I was growing up, they had Chevy, Pontiac, Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac. Remember all those cars? Where's Pontiac? Pontiac doesn't exist anymore, right? Oldsmobile doesn't exist anymore. They had to drop those lines because people weren't. So they suffered a great deal because they weren't listening to their customers or following the trends. How many jobs could have been saved, and how many pension plans would have been saved if they had only tracked the trends and followed the data. You remember back in the old days what this is?
Mm-hmm.
You might know what that is?
Yep.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. One time, right, my wife took my son over to visit my auntie. And my auntie was, I think she was about 85, 86 then. She never updated her phone, right? She never had a push button phone. She only had a rotary phone. So my wife told my son, go over there and call your daddy, right? And tell him where we are. So he went over, he knew how to pick up the receiver. But then he's looking at the phone, he's going bam, 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 bam. He's pushing the buttons, he's hitting the buttons, and then he comes back to his mama and says, but mama, I'm trying to call daddy, but this phone don't work. He had never seen a rotary dial phone before. He had never seen one, right? So my auntie was still stuck in the rotary dial age when everybody had moved on to push button phones and to wireless phones, right? Anybody remember the excuse me just 1 minute. Perhaps I'm teaching class right now. I'll call you back. When everybody's phone line was a landline phone, right? You had to pay 25 cents per minute for long distance. Man, every month my phone bill would be like $200. My wife wanted to call home every week, right? But things have changed, right? Consumers no longer. What is that the case now, right? If not, what has changed? Everything has changed in telecommunications, right? So now everybody has cell phones, right? You don't have cell phones, something wrong with you. You can tell how old somebody is, but they still have a landline. Because anybody who is 40 and under doesn't even have a landline. They think, why have a landline? That's a complete waste of time. So people who have a landline, you know that they tend to be older. Track the trends. Remember the early cell phones? Yeah, you almost had to have a suitcase to carry the thing around. It was so big, right? Big and clunky, right? And then all of a sudden they came up with hands-free technology. The first hand-free telephone, right? You remember what it looked like? You just had to strap it onto your head. That was hands-free technology, right? But my, how things have changed, right? But you got to track the trends, right? We've all seen the Wall Streets up and down, and we see our nation on the verge of near economic collapse, right? And we ask, why didn't they see this coming? Well, you can see it coming if you track the trends, right? Stock market dives that we have seen, some of these things are absolutely predictable. If you study the markets, you know that there are certain triggers that usually tend to make markets rise and make markets fall. There are certain seasons in which it happens. There's certain cycles in which it happens. Right now, we're in a very, very unusual stock market situation because the market is going up while so many people are unemployed. And people are asking why. They have never seen this before. And they don't understand it. I thoroughly understand it. You know why I thoroughly understand it? Because I track trends, that's why. I track trends. And so what you see happening right now is with this massive unemployment, you find the people who are poor are continuing to slide further and further into poverty. They're sliding into poverty means that they can no longer pay their rents and they cannot meet their mortgage obligations. The middle class people and above, and the upper middle class who have disposable income, who had their money into real estate, are now moving their money quickly out of real estate into the stock market so they can continue to protect their growth, knowing that when the real estate market crashes, they can take those assets out of the market and now buy real estate at bargain basement prices. That's exactly what's happening. How do I know that? Because I track trends. That's what I'm saying to you. You don't have to be a prophet to do this, right? All you got to do is track the trends, okay? So, in congregations as well, congregations as well, you can and you should track trends. Congregations change, experience trends, and have life cycles just like people do. So just like there's this birth and this curve here to adulthood and finally to death, you see that in organizations as well. And so I tell you a little about this particular church. It's called the Ephesus Seventh-day Adventist Church. If you know anything about regional conference history, the Ephesus Seventh-day Adventist Church is one of the most important churches and had been in Black Adventism for quite some time. Sitting in New York City. At one time, the Ephesus Church was one of the largest congregations in the denomination, and had a membership of about 2,200. When most Adventist churches were somewhere around 100, Ephesus had about 2,200. The only churches that were larger than Ephesus were the institutional churches that were like Loma Linda and a few others like that. But it was always, for many, many years, in the top 10 large churches in the denomination, period, located in Harlem. Right? Set at the crossroads. God called them to be the salt of the earth. But Jesus says, if the salt loses its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? So God has his place, he has his church, he sets it up, right? But the salt losing its savor, you know what that says to me? That says the salt loses its savor because it is not quick enough to respond to the changes that are taking place around it. Dynamics are changing. It is changing. Right? But it's not responding quickly enough to the change. Right? We're to be the light of the world. Right? A city set upon a hill, which cannot be hid. Right? But if the light grows dim, because we're not tracking or responding. Here was Ephesus in 1940. In 1940, this particular church happened to be one of the grand churches. The congregation that actually inhabited this building was a Reformed church. It was the oldest existing congregation in New York City. It used to be further down in Manhattan. They moved into Harlem. They built this church. The church was built by a famous architect. This was considered to be one of his grand architectural designs. It's a landmark building. Okay. Ephesus Church had some of the greatest pastors in the world. These are historic figures of Black Adventism. G.E. Peters, right? F.L. Peterson, who, by the way, Peterson Hall is named after him. He was a former president of Oakwood and the person in charge of the Negro department. G.E. Peters was the first one. Willie Lee, R.T. Hudson, who later became a conference president. Sam Hutchins, who was the president. Calvin Rock, who was the president of Oakwood and also vice president. Edwin Humphrey, Cliff Jones, who's now the president of Lake Region. Clement Murray, who's at 3ABN. John Nixon, who's the secretary of South Central Conference. Pastor Sherwin Jack, who's now the pastor of Berean. All these individuals pastored that church. Ron Smith, who was a pastor, who's now the president of the Southern Union, all pastored this particular church, right? So it was an important church, right? Skip over some of this. But things began to happen to the building and to the congregation over years. At one time, 2,200 people. 1969, there was a fire that destroyed the building for 8 years. They were someplace else, had to spend millions of dollars. Right? The congregation never grew back to that same size after the fire. By 1945, they had 1,000. By 1960s, they had over 2,000. Right? But in 2004, the book membership. Now, keep in mind, we talked a little bit about metrics. We're going to look at the metrics in terms of church growth here. 2004, the book membership of 2,200 was down to an active membership of about 1,200. So which way is the trend going? Going in the wrong direction. When did it reach its peak? The 1960s. So it was growing rapidly, reached its peak in the 60s. By the time you get to the 2000s, we see it's in decline. And it shows signs of aging. Here are some of the comments that were made to the pastor by other pastors in Harlem. So Ephesus, in his mind, was this great, wonderful, dynamic church. But here's what others were saying about Ephesus, other pastors, non-Adventists. Right? They were saying things like, I never knew that was even a church, because I never saw any activity going on in there. People used to say all kinds of things because they didn't know. The congregation was graying out. The ministry was static and programmatic. The church was not involved or engaged in the community. The community was changing, and the church was dying. Here are the characteristics of decline, and we'll end with this because we'll come back next week and we'll try to pick up, because I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you. Probably we're hearing my voice, but this presentation is online for you, right? Characteristics of decline: anxiety, fear, denial, paranoia, and conflict. If I want to judge whether or not my church is healthy or whether my church is in decline, if it's on the backside of that curve, here's some clear signs. When a church is worried about its future, when a church is fearful, when a church denies its reality, when a church is steeped in paranoia, always afraid that the conference is going to come and do something to them, or somebody's trying to take something from them, or these people are going to come in here and disrupt what we have, that sort of paranoia. And then finally, when you see a church embroiled in conflict, you know it's a dying church. So there are trends to track in the church. There's tithe, there's baptisms, there's magazine subscriptions, right? But these don't tell us what's going on, right? Rather, they're about the outcome of what has already transpired. So I'm just going to end with this, right? Stages of congregational development, once again, are birth, infancy, childhood, adolescence, prime, maturity, the empty nest, retirement, old age, and then finally death. And I will end there because I could keep talking. Any questions or comments? In terms of looking at the situation that you see in your particular church, have you noticed any trends that concern you? In the congregation that you are looking at right now, have you noticed any trends that concern you?
Aging out in our church. We have more older than we do younger people.
They're aging out.
Mm-hmm.
My church, two things I observed. It's the aging out. I guess the average age of my church is probably closer to 60. And another thing is that my church is predominantly a black church, but the neighborhood has changed. So right now we are basically located in a Dominican neighborhood, but the church is basically black. And most people in the church don't speak Spanish, but the community is a Spanish-speaking community.
So the church island.
Yep.
The people in your church, they live in the neighborhood, or do they drive in?
Most people drive in.
So they're older and they drive in.
Yes, the older, yeah. So a lot of older people, the van picks them up in the morning. The van goes around, makes rounds, and picks them up from the houses and brings them to church. or they carpool with other people. So they're older, they don't live in the neighborhood, and the demographics of the community has changed.
So I want you to take a look at the trend and project that trend out over 5 years. What's going to happen?
I think if nothing changes, the church is going to die out.
How long do you give it?
I'll say 10 years.
10 years, okay. Ms. Francine, how long do you give your church?
Probably about 5.
Probably about 5 years.
Yeah. Not only is the church dying out, the community is also dying out. We're in an area where the largest amount of people, basically, I guess, is in a nursing home. I mean, the handicap area. And then there are like 3 different churches in the same area that we are. And most of the people have been attending the one larger church, which is Baptist. So.
Have either of your churches given any consideration as to these trends? I mean, you've noticed them. Has there been any discussion in the congregation about the trends that you have noticed?
We have had evangelistic efforts. We had Bible workers come in, and we were having Bible workers, planned to have Bible workers come in this time before COVID hit, to kind of work with us some more in our neighborhood some more.
Okay.
In a larger area, so people maybe could drive in or come in to the area.
As your church, had any discussion about the trends that we just identified?
I guess technically, no, not really. Nothing other than the fact that we know that we're an older congregation. The membership is older.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes, I ask the question and see, oftentimes the trends are in front of us, and we sort of know that they're there, but we don't really discuss it. Because sometimes to discuss these obvious trends can feel self-defeating, it can feel like blaming. And oftentimes when the church is in that stage, people started blaming each other. They said, well, if these people hadn't come in here with this ruckus music, then God, the Holy Spirit would be here. Or if these people had only prayed more, then the Spirit would have fallen. And so you get this conflict and the blame game going back and forth. So people start looking at each other rather than focusing in on the trend and looking at the metrics. That's why if you're able to just pull back and take a look at the metrics and ask yourself the question about what you were seeing and are able to depersonalize it, then you're better able to provide an intervention. I call it being a helicopter. I do this in my personal life, and I do it in organizations as well. And that is that I pull back and I pretend like I'm a helicopter flying above it, so that I can depersonalize it. Because once you are in the system, the longer that you're in a system, the more difficult it is for you to evaluate the system. Right? If you first come to a new job, the moment you walk into the new job, you see everything that's wrong and everything that's right. You see all the things that you can build upon, and you see all the things that should be changed. You see it so clearly when you first get there. After you're there for about 1.5 years, you don't see anything anymore because you are the problem. You have just become a part of it. And so one of the things that an administrator does is an administrator has the ability to fly above it, to pull themselves up and out of it and look down upon it objectively, to see the moving pieces of the puzzle, to see the data and see the interaction of the data, and to extract from that data the trends that are happening so that they can make wise strategic decisions for their organization. In conclusion, I would say this to you, right? As you're going back and looking at your church under that first assignment, just give it some study, right? Think about it in terms of worship, fellowship, stewardship, discipleship. Think of it in terms of, what do these metrics look like in this church? So that you can begin to have a clear understanding about your ministry context. All right? Well, I want to thank you all so very much. You all are so kind just to sit here and just listen to me ramble on for an hour and a half. Just for that, I give you all an A. Everybody gets an A. You get an A. You get an A. You get an A. You all get an A. So God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And if you would stay back just for a minute, Sister Wilson, I need to talk with you just for a moment, okay? Yeah. Let's have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we want to thank you so very much for this day that you've given to us and for the opportunity that we have to be leaders. We know, Lord, the times in which we live require us to process so much information, so many bits and pieces of things that are coming at us all the time from so many different angles. But I pray right now, Lord, that you please bless us as we continue to explore. Bless these students as they look at their ministry context and begin to unpack and to explore the church situation that they find themselves in right now. And Lord, please bring us back together again safely. And I pray right now for those who are in the middle of the hurricane, those who are down there where the weather is rough, please protect them from harm and danger, I pray. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
All right. God bless you all. And I'll talk to you all next week.